Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Improving Women's Access to In-Demand Technical Middle Skill Jobs, a new methodology to address occupational segregation in CTE and workforce development by Ariane Hegovich, Chandra Childers, and Elise Shaw. My name is Greg Nagy, and I am from The Ohio State University and provide technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project, along with Freda Walker. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1 hour and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the napeequity.org website. As you already have found out, you'll be watching the presenters present slides through the Adobe Connect interface while listening to them talk over your computer speakers or your phone. You will also be able to interact using the chat pod. All the participants' microphones and telephones have been automatically muted. If you would like, you can make the presentation larger for just your screen by clicking the full screen button at the top of your Adobe Connect window for the presentation pod. Click it again to return to the normal screen. You can also download resources from the Documents to Download pod. Click on the file you want to download and then click the Download Files button. This will open the file as a link in a different tab in your browser. The presenters will answer most questions after the presentation. However, we can take questions at any time. This is how we take questions. At any time during the presentation, you may submit a question by typing your question in the chat pod in the Adobe Connect window. We will read and respond to these questions at the end of the presentation. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Freda Walker, consultant for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. Freda?
Thank you. I'm so excited today because there's so many people on from various places throughout the United States. We have an excellent webinar, so welcome to all. I think people may still be answering these questions, so I'm going to just move to the next slide here and thank Greg for the technical assistance he provides from Ohio State University, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the funding. We receive a National Science Foundation grant, and with that grant, NAEP is able to provide the webinars like the one we're having today. I want to remind you that we do archive all the webinars. It is recorded. You can go back and look at any of the past webinars, so we encourage you to do that. You can receive a certificate of completion for today's webinar once you complete a webinar survey, which will happen at the end of the webinar. Also, Greg mentioned that you can download documents. I'd like for you to look underneath the documents to download area and see that we have a document number 1 that relates to NAEP and all the resources and services that are provided. They can customize any kind of training that you might want or webinar that you might want. We also have a resource handout for today's webinar. If you download that, you're going to find the contact information for our presenters. You will find all the references that they use in the PowerPoint. Also, you'll find just some key points that they've pointed out to you throughout the webinar. You will also see that there are two, number 3 and 4. The first one is the report that they're going to be referencing, and there's an executive summary that's number 3, and then the full report is number 4. Number 5, many times people ask, can they get a copy of the PowerPoint? This is a PDF of the PowerPoint that's being presented today. So please click on those, download them, and have them for your reference after the webinar. We're going to take questions twice during this webinar. We ask you to also use the chat function to express your opinions if you have any resources to share, or also if you have questions. I'd like to begin by us taking a poll, and I'm going to switch off of this. I know we've all been working with answering some of the questions. I appreciate it. This is, we'd like to know what role you play, and can you answer in the poll and also chat. I know a lot of you have already chatted your information, so you don't have to, but do it again. Let's just see. Okay. Okay, it looks, oh, pardon me. It looks to me like we have the majority of folks that are coming from community college, but we have a good representation of K-12, some community-based training organizations, 2 of them, workforce development. I appreciate seeing those people on. Also some researchers. This is very good to think about the researchers that are providing information for us to make wise decisions for our classrooms and training programs. Also, we have all variety of people. I welcome those that have come from the Department of Labor, also from the National Science Foundation. So just keep typing in the information so everyone knows who's on the webinar. I'm now going to move it to a different format that we have our layout, and because I'm ready to introduce our speakers. And we have 3 today, and Chandra will begin and she will introduce the other speakers as they come on. So welcome to our speakers. You can turn on your webinar cam.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad that you could join us. I'm Chandra Childers, a senior research scientist here at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Actually, go ahead. Yeah. At the Institute for Women's Policy Research. What we do here, we're located in Washington, D.C., and our research focuses around research practices, policies that improve women's access to economic, social, and political opportunity. So that's kind of where our research focus, and as Freda has said, we'll have some of our resources available. Today, I will be joined by 2 of my colleagues. Ariane Higovish, and Ariane will be talking with you today about our new project, Pathways to Equity. This is a research project that focuses specifically on gaining women greater access to good middle-skilled jobs. My other colleague, Elise Shaw, she will also be talking with you today and kind of changing direction a little bit by looking at the role of supportive services and how they facilitate women's participation in career and technical education, including the fields of non-traditional occupations for women. But I will begin by talking and providing some background on occupational segregation and how occupational segregation is related to the gender wage gap, to women's earnings and the gender wage gap. Okay, and so here, this graphic will show the relationship between occupational segregation and the gender wage gap over time. If you look at the bottom dotted line, that's an index of segregation. So what this tells us is how segregated men and women are across all occupations. The value of 0.64 in 1980 tells us that 64% of women would need to move into an occupation in which women were underrepresented in order for men and women to have the same occupational distributions. The top line here is the gender wage ratio. This is women's earnings relative to men's earnings. So in 1980, women's earnings were 64% of the earnings of men. Women earned 64 cents for each dollar that men earned. If you look at the 2 lines over time, what we see is that over the course of the 1980s, when the index of segregation declines the most, we see the greatest increase in women's earnings relative to men's earnings. So we see a mirror image between the 2 lines. If we look at the period over the 1980s, the decline in occupational segregation is much low. It slows down. It doesn't decline at as great a rate as it did over the 1980s. But we also see that the gender wage ratio, it also increases, but there's less consistent increase in the gender wage ratio over time. And so what this means is that the wage gap, while it closes the most over the 1980s, it closes at a slower pace over the 1990s. And then as we get beyond the early 2000s, we see that the index of segregation, there's not any real further decline. We see relative stagnation. So the index of segregation indicates that about 51% of men or women would need to move into an occupation where where their gender was underrepresented in order for both to have similar occupational distributions. And if we look at the gender wage ratio, we see that we also get a stagnation in changes in the gender wage ratio. So the gender wage gap is also not continuing to close over this time. So we see the relationship here between occupational segregation and the gender wage gap. A recent study by economists Francine Blau and Lawrence Kahn document this relationship. So they quantified the contribution of occupational segregation to the gender wage gap. And what they find is that occupational segregation, it accounts for about 1/3 of the wage gap. And if we take occupational segregation with the segregation of men and women across industries, together these two account for over half of the gender wage gap between men and women. And if we look at the numbers I have next to the graphic here, what we see is that women of color have earnings that are much lower relative to white males. So because women of color are more segregated than white women from white men, who are the largest group in the labor market, we see that their earnings are even lower relative to male workers. So Asian Pacific Islander women who have the highest earnings earn just 86.5% of white male earnings, whereas Hispanic women have the lowest earnings. They earn just 53.8%, or 54 cents for every dollar that their male counterpart earns. Okay. And here we have another illustration of segregation, but we want to look at both occupational and industry segregation. So if we take the 20 occupations that employ the largest share of women, the largest numbers of women, we see that more than 40%, 41.8% of all full-time women work in those 20 occupations. And in 10 of those occupations, and fully half of these occupations, they are female dominated. So women make up 75% or more of all workers in those occupations. For men are less concentrated. In the 20 occupations that employ the greatest number of men, just under 1/3 of men work in those occupations. Interestingly, if we compare the 20 occupations that employ the greatest number of women, the 20 occupations that employ the greatest number of men, we would find that only 4 occupations overlap on both lists. So women and men tend to work predominantly in different sets of occupations. And the graphic we have here shows us women's share across industries. So here we have 15 industries and women's share of workers in each industry. And a number of interesting things stand out. This looks at women's share of workers in 1990 and in 2014. And one of the things, despite the discussion that we've had around segregation, this shows that there has been very little change over time. Women are still more than 80% of workers in the health and social industry, while they are still less than 1 in 6 workers in construction. What this shows us is that women workers at every level of education is the key way we seek to improve our earnings. Here we have women and men compared at each level of education. Women earn less than their male counterparts at every level of education, and women will need a bachelor's degree in order to have earnings high enough to lift a family of 3 above near poverty, while men lift a family of 3 above near poverty with a high school diploma. And here we have occupational projections These are the occupations that are projected to add the most new jobs between 2014 and 2024. The key takeaway from this slide is what it means for the future. The occupations that are listed here, many are highly segregated occupations, many are female, either majority female or female dominated. The first three are upward of 80% female workers. Many are also low-wage occupations. And so if these occupations become a larger and larger share of all occupations, what we would find is, again, we could see segregation begin to increase as well as the gender wage gap. I now want to turn it over to my colleague, Ariane Higavish, who will share with you and discuss women's access to middle skill occupations. Good middle skill occupations. Thank you.
Well, thank you also from me. We're very excited to be able to discuss our new project on middle skilled occupations with you. Let me just begin with a slight overview. As Chandra had described, the gender wage gap is very directly linked to women's underrepresentation in better paid occupations. What this project does is to focus in specifically on those occupations that that are middle skilled, that is, they require less than a bachelor's degree, but they require at least a high school diploma and probably a little bit of additional training. Our Pathway to Equity initiatives, which is part of the JP Morgan Chase Foundation's New Skills Initiative, tries to do the following: to take the need employers have to fill skill shortages in middle skilled jobs because of demographic change, current generation of workers retiring, and because of growth and skill changes in those jobs, and to think through how that opportunity, these jobs for which people need to be trained, may provide women with better access to better paid occupations and employers with access to additional workers. What we do, just to give you an overview, and I go into this at greater detail, is we identify target occupations that are projected to add jobs or have high job openings until 2024. It all uses Bureau of Labor Statistics projections, and which currently have median annual earnings for full-time work of at least $35,000. And we focus on three sectors: manufacturing, transportation, and logistics, and information technology. And then we use a methodology to try and shake the focus on difference in broad occupations and to look beneath that at what is required to perform jobs, so that we can kind of compare two different occupations, but say actually they are probably more similar than different if you look beyond just the occupational title. And I should just say we also have a searchable website as part of this project, which includes information on every middle skill job identified by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which pays at least $35,000 per year currently and is projected to grow. And for that shows where they are target, similar occupations which are female or have a large presence of women. Anyway, as I said, I will say more about this. So just to go back to Chandra's point about occupational segregation, here, just for middle skill jobs, we can see that women are more likely than men to work in middle skill jobs, that is, jobs that require at least a high school diploma but less than a bachelor's degree, but that they are overrepresented. There are more than 8 in 3 workers in those middle skill jobs that pay less than $30,000 a year, and that they are underrepresented in the good middle skill jobs that pay more than 35,000 a year. And you can see underneath women's share of good middle skill jobs in different sectors. Women are the majority of middle skilled workers in the healthcare sector, to nobody's surprise. But in almost all other growing middle skilled occupations, they are underrepresented, and they're particularly underrepresented in transportation, advanced manufacturing, and the construction industry. And to take this to the level of earnings, here are the median earnings of middle skilled workers, that is both male and female workers, in middle skilled occupations that are at least 75% female, that are traditionally female, those that are mixed, and in occupations that are non-traditional for women, that are at least 75% male. And you can see that there's a massive gender earnings differential of $17,000 a year, translating into a gender earnings ratio of just 66 cents on the dollar earned by workers in the male-dominated occupations. So just to stress this is all workers in these occupations. And on top of this often is a gender wage gap. So women are disadvantaged because they work in a female-dominated occupation, but also because they are women. Okay, so now to our methodology. As I said, what we try to do with this is to identify opportunities for women in terms of their training and advancement that looks beyond current gender division of occupations. And we've identified, on the one hand, target occupations that, as I said, have minimum earnings of $35,000 a year currently, that have at least projected job openings of 25,000 nationally, and are middle skill, and to compare those to what we call on-ramp occupations, which are occupations where women currently work, but which might provide a good base and opportunity to move into these target occupations. And those on-ramp occupations are defined as occupations that are majority female or employ at least 25,000 women, and that are middle skilled, and also that currently have earnings of at least $1,000 less than, or basically they pay less than of the middle skill target occupation to which we compared. And to compare the occupations, we draw on the ONET database for occupational characteristics. To say a little bit more on that, here are the 6 criteria that are being used by the ONET database. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It's a really intricate and great database or way of taking occupations apart. We use or draw on 252 different criteria and compare all the occupations for which we can have data in the CPS. And I think the ONET database goes even beyond that in terms of the occupations they use. What they do is they describe each occupations according to 6 buckets, which they call worker-oriented in terms of people who are currently in the occupation, and job-oriented in terms of what you need to do to fulfill the work in the occupation. And they do this in terms of they do surveys of incumbent workers, and they have expert panels, and they have people observing jobs. So it's a very detailed methodology. It includes issues such as the abilities and interests of workers, requirements for education, how much experience you need, as well as a detailed description of what you need to do in the job. Do you need to stand up? Do you need to interact with people a lot? Do you need night goggles? Is the environment noisy, or do you have a lot of control over the environment? So it really is a very full way of looking at it. What we have been doing is to develop an overall value to compare occupations based on all 252 criteria. And there's more about this in our report if you're interested. Now, to give you one example of what this leads to, for example, is taking the occupations of cooks and truck drivers. Now, cook is not a female-dominated occupation, but there are more than 700,000 women working as cooks. And cooks is one of these occupations which is poorly paid for almost everyone. So I think the median earnings are around $400 a week or so. It's not a good occupation to be in. Truck driver, on the other hand, is one of the skill shortage occupations. And if you look at labor market data, there often are issues that transportation logistics and particularly truck driver jobs can't be filled. Now, truck drivers also, there are various categories. There are truck driver jobs which are not that great, but the good ones, the HGV drivers, can earn very high wages. So now if you compare cooks to truck drivers, you can firstly see that on the basic comparisons, cooks and truck drivers are closer in terms of the occupational characteristics than 70% of all the 470 occupations in the database. And they are similar in issues such as the need for deductive and inductive reasoning, the ability to visualize physical arrangements, the need that you need to be enterprising, and the extent to which your work is controlled or you control it yourself, and the level of paperwork. Really, it goes beyond kind of one person standing in a kitchen and the other person sitting in a truck to say, what is the environment like and what do you actually need to be successful? Now, here is a much more detailed graph comparing, again, one of the top shortage occupations in manufacturing, welding, with one of the target occupations, packaging machine operators. And you can see, if you look at the four bottom kind of buckets, really, of characteristics. Oops, sorry, I need to look at my papers to be able to read it, which is work context, work activities, abilities, and skills. They are the differences. The orange line is welders, the blue line is packaging machine operators, who is female-dominated occupation. And you can see that there are small differences, but the distributions are very similar and the differences are not large. Where differences are larger is in the knowledge section of this comparison. And this is exactly what this project is about, to say, if you want new welders, you have to train them anyway. Here are women who are already working in manufacturing in a lot of similar circumstances. Why not look at those if you want to recruit and train new workers, given that you have to train workers anyway, rather than taking people you have no background about. And of course, this may also help to convince women that they may want to engage in these jobs. Now, taking a second occupation, This one is Inspectors, Testers, Sorters, Samplers and Weighers, long title, but again, this is the third most common occupation in manufacturing where employers say they cannot fill skills and where the large projected vacancies or future vacancies. Now, what this does is to show the target or the on-ramp occupations for inspectors, to highlight the pool of women who could be recruited to these. Now, the first thing to notice is there are a lot of women already working as inspectors, but there's a huge wage gap between the women and the men who work as inspectors. And a lot of those is working in different sectors of manufacturing. But then you also have other jobs, cooks again, shipping and receiving traffic clerks, you know, kind of more administrative jobs, and people working in electrical and electronic assembly. Different occupations, but those who overlap in a lot of key aspects of inspecting. And so if you want to hire people to recruit and train, those may be the people to look for, to even if, almost to lower your risk in terms of training somebody who might then not be right for the job. Now here, this is our website, and I hope this is large enough for you to read. Otherwise, go on the website. On there, it's very large. On our website, you can search by sector or industry, and you can search any kind of middle skill growing job. And what it will show you is the bit on the right. The computer user support specialist is one of the top growing middle skill jobs, the target jobs in the IT sector. For each of the occupations, it will show you the median annual earnings for full-time work. It will show you the median annual earnings for women, so the gender wage gap, to be honest about that. And also it will show you the percent female in that occupation, and will discuss what the occupational requirements are in the occupation. And what we have done is a lot of occupations have a variety of educational profiles, but at least over half of computer user support specialists have an associate's degree or less. So, and some may have BA, but it's still much less than associate degree. Now, one of the on-ramp occupations is health practitioner, support technologist, and technician's job. It is an occupation which is almost a good middle skill occupation, but you can see it pays much less than computer user support specialists. So really what this suggests, or what we hope it may be useful for, is saying to somebody who is a health practitioner and looking where to go next, or who is considering a career as a health practitioner support technician, and may think about investing in her education to maximize her earnings. And you can see with an AA degree in computer user support specialists, you earn much more, significantly more than with college courses as a healthcare practitioner. Now, to use a second example, is this one actually shows the benefits of choosing your career and investing in education to maximize your earnings. And here we have compensation benefits and job analyst specialists, a female-dominated occupation where you need at least a bachelor's degree, but in fact you earn less than web developers, where at least at this point in time the majority of employees only have associate degrees. So it's a way also of trying to visualize the really the impact of your investment in education on your earnings, and to focus your education on fields that generate the highest earnings if you're so interested, given that the occupations are more similar than they are different. Oops. No. Okay, so in a nutshell, and there's much more about this in the report, as well as resources on how to improve access to women to these occupations. What we are hoping to do with the Pathways to Equity Good Jobs for Women initiative is to really use the pending skill shortages because of the aging workforce to almost see whether we can restart the emphasis on improving women's access to occupations which are well paid but where they are underrepresented. So, and our goal really is directed, or our message, we hope, is directed at three groups of people, of stakeholders in the workforce development process. The first one is employers, trying to say, give this another thought, when you invest in training of new staff. We hope that it may encourage some women who think about where to put their training dollars and where to seek careers to widen their gaze. And we also hope that it may be a useful resource for career counselors and workforce developers who work with both women and employers to see whether women can't get better access to better paying jobs. In other words, what we're trying to do is to highlight the need for change, but hopefully also to provide resources and a slightly new way at looking at this issue of occupational segregation. And now we very much would like to hear your questions or comments and to see whether you think this could be of any use for you.
We have some questions that have come in, and I'm going to start with this one. In 2015, I have conducted a study. Oh, we're getting a little rebound. Ariane, can you see the questions that I have on the right-hand side?
The first one we see is a question from Donna Lenhoff for Chandra. Is that?
Yes.
Do you want me to read it, or should Chandra read it? Oh, okay. So
you all can read, and then we won't get the rebound.
Okay. Question. Hello, Donna. Question for Chandra. On the slide showing women's occupational segregation by industry, do those numbers include all the women working in the industry, including clerical workers?
Yes, that's one of the things about looking at differences between industry and occupation. The industry will include all of the workers in that industry, including clerical, including all of the occupations that are included within that industry. Yes. It's important to know that distinction. Very important. It's a great question.
Next question comes from Laura. In 2015, I have conducted a study entitled Women's Allocation of Time in India, Indonesia, and China, reviewing data and information on paid and unpaid work through time use surveys. The government of India has done an outstanding work in including such data in national accounts. Does the US government do anything similar? Do you conduct, how do we get this down?
There's a scroll here.
So we, on the, whoops.
You can definitely.
Do we conduct analysis on how women spend their time when they do not work? So we are not the Department of Labor, but the American Time Use Survey is also fielded in the United States, and the Department of Labor, and there are a number of people on, I think, listening in who may be even better posed to answer this question. It has used the Time Use Survey, the ATUS, to analyze, for example, access to paid leave, differences in childcare, access to flexible working. The data are not, to my knowledge, included in the official employment or GDP analysis or official data, but certainly, the administration has made use of this survey and is fielding it, and there's quite a lot of research in the US to build on this. This is next one. Okay, Amy Burnett Cross, hello. Question for Ariane. Jessica Pan's 2010 research on occupational segregation indicates that there are tipping points in gender composition, i.e. the changes in gender composition of occupations are not linear. When you're looking at middle-skill occupations, do we have reason to believe that increasing the share of women may encourage men to leave those occupations and thus leading to a decrease in wages? That is one of the perennial questions, but we were discussing it, I think, yesterday. But the evidence is less straightforward than one may think. I think in general, yes, but for example, is there a tipping point? Where is the tipping point? If you take computing, IT, women were more than 30% of workers. Now they are down to less than 25%. I think in some occupations like computers getting there less to 20. So we kind of thought that there may be a tipping point, but there wasn't a tipping point. In others, look at accounting or veterinarians, there seems to be a tipping point. There's quite a lot of discussion, and we're happy for anybody who would like to see more of this to provide some references on how far the low wages, say, of female-dominated occupations come with the occupation and the social stigma, if you like, or are related to women in the occupation, and also how far they, whether they are tipping points or not, or I had one other point which I have forgotten now, but there clearly is a relationship, but it's, if you take something like cooks, female dominated, used to be a female occupation, it is very low paid, and there are lots of men in there. And a lot, basically you also need to factor in immigration and race and ethnic segregation of those occupations for both men and women, I think. Do you want to read one?
Sure. I noticed this one here that didn't get over here, but Patricia says, are homemakers on an on-ramp which we can compare?
That is a very interesting question. They are not described by, they're not in the BLS occupational database, but over the decades, I think we have a fairly good skill profile of women homemakers in terms of coordination, management of resources, timekeeping, leadership. So I think one could. But it's not in the BLS, of course.
Yeah. And then Danielle asks, does the website go so far as to break down projected industry need by geographical location?
That is an excellent question. It does not at the moment. That's our hope for the future, and we are in the middle of hoping that we may be able to do that. Depends on funding, really. Next, is there another one? I don't see any.
That's the last of the questions, so you can continue on.
Okay, so now we would like to slightly change tag, and oops, I want to go back.
Yeah.
Right. No.
Perfect.
Where is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to introduce my colleague Elise Shaw, who will talk about a separate research project that we have, which looks at supportive services and their role for job training success. And she's going to say how this may relate to women's participation in career and technical education.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today. I am going to switch gears a little bit, like Ariane said, and talk to you a little bit more about supportive services and the research IWPR is doing about how supportive services help women and men, but we're looking at mainly women, and enroll and complete job training programs. For this webinar, I'll try and focus more on women, specifically in non-traditional fields. So for the past, just to give you a little background, for the past 2 years, IWPR has been working on our Job Training Success Project, which was designed to examine the landscape of supportive services like childcare and transportation assistance, among many others, in the workforce development system. So the project looks specifically at how available these services are, what are the gaps in services, what are the unmet support needs, what needs are being met, and how we could address these issues. This project was started because though we kind of have this anecdotal evidence from a lot of different experts in the field that supportive services are vital to completion, especially for women, of job training programs, there wasn't a lot of research or evidence that we could really sink our teeth into. So IWPR got some funding and decided that we would see what we could find out. So we developed this project. We developed our research questions, which supportive services are most critical to women's success, how available are they, and then we decided to go out and see what we could find. We did a research review, which is published and on our website. We did about 25 expert interviews in conjunction with that research review. Again, it's all published in a report on our website. We also did a nationwide program scan just to see who's out there, who's doing what supportive services are they providing. Out of that program scan, we kind of narrowed it down to about 8 site visits where we really honed in on programs that were doing something innovative for providing supportive services to their participants. And then we fielded 2 online surveys, one of program administrators and one of program participants. For our surveys for the job training project, we had our methodology was really just to reach out to networks and people that we knew and tried to get as many people as we could to respond to them. As far as our survey of job training administrators, actually in both of them, we got responses from a wide variety of programs, community colleges, Job Corps, and other community-based training centers, as well as for our participant survey, we got both current and previous participants. For our job training administrator survey, we got about 168 responses, from programs providing occupational skills training. For our participant survey, we got almost 1,900 survey responses, which included 180 women in non-traditional career training education programs. Our responses were a broad range of states, 41 states in the District of Columbia for the administrator survey, 47 states, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico for our participant survey. We do want to say that our responses are not fully representative of nationwide job training programs. I would say that the characteristics that we get, we have slightly different characteristics for our participant survey. 65% of our sample are women, which is also unusual, and they're younger and they have a smaller share of parents. The good thing about our survey is it really did say that that support services are very vitally important for participants. About 97% of administrators and 80% of our participants overall in all of our survey said that supportive services are vital for enrollment and completion. However, although that everyone says it's very vital to provide them, there are many challenges that get in the way of providing comprehensive supportive services. The reality is that many participants don't receive the services that they need in order to enroll or complete job training programs. In our administrator survey, we asked for what did the administrators see as the greatest unmet needs for women? And for this presentation, we've actually broken that down into overall all programs and our male-dominated programs. So as you can see, the top unmet needs for women: child care assistance, emergency cash assistance, housing assistance, transportation assistance, mental health counseling, and domestic violence services pretty much align for both the overall administrators and for the male-dominated programs. However, as you can see, for housing assistance and for mental health counseling for women, women was not one of the greatest unmet needs for male-dominated programs. This could be for a variety of reasons. One, the sample of male-dominated programs was a little bit small, so we're drawing from a smaller sample. It also could be just because they don't have as many women in those programs, so they aren't seeing all of the women who might have those needs, or the women who have those needs are going somewhere else where they could maybe access those needs, and so aren't enrolling in the programs that don't have these services. But child care assistance is across the board the number one unmet need for women, both that administrators see with hands down. So that we found that to be very interesting in all of our responses, that child care kind of came to the top for everything. So when we talk about our women in non-traditional training, the participants' perspective, from our survey of the 180 women who are in those programs, we see that completion rates are very high for women in non-traditional fields. From our respondents, 89% of women completed their training programs, and of those who had already completed, and 93% say they plan to complete. So barring any unforeseen circumstances, they plan to complete them. They're getting their needs pretty well met in these programs. Again, it might be that we're seeing that our sample is drawing from people who are in programs where their needs are pretty well met. So 61% of women say that they're actually getting their support needs met, whereas only 20% say they have few or many unmet needs. So childcare is still the biggest need. 30% say they needed but did not receive childcare assistance, which is unfortunate. And though 18% of these women in these programs say that they have no needs, no supportive needs at all, when you look at the men and compare it to the men, 31% of the men in these same programs, these same non-traditional programs, say that they have no supportive needs. So as you can see, the women who are coming into these programs have many more needs than the men do. So one program that we actually went and did a case site visit with, and will be in our promising practices report that will be released shortly, that I just kind of wanted to lift up because they're doing some pretty innovative things, is Climb Wyoming. And I noticed somebody commented and said, was Climb Wyoming on your list? They definitely were. We think they're doing a fantastic job. For those who don't know Climb Wyoming, they provide training for single mothers, specifically for single mothers. They do occupational skills training, a variety of different occupations, but they do a lot of non-traditional occupations as well, which includes construction, manufacturing, transportation, distribution, and logistics. So there are many different programs, and they're all throughout. I think they have 5 sites in Wyoming. They provide a wide range of supportive services. They have very much this holistic, actually kind of therapeutic model of providing a full range of supports for their participants. And I would suggest people go check them out. They're pretty innovative. They're very They rely on transparency and honest communication between staff and program participants. They really want to build strong trust between their students and staff. They're very relationship based, but part of that is making sure that the supportive service needs of their participants are met, and that these women can go from occupations where they might not be able to support their families, and as the breadwinner of their families, that's very important, to occupations where they can really support their families and live a life and bring in a paycheck that means they're economically stable. So here just is a quick slide, and this will be in your packet of slides if you download the presentation, but it gives you links to all of the different reports that kind of touch on these issues. Like I said, some of our job training reports are actually forthcoming, so those will be coming out in the next few weeks actually. So I would definitely check IWPR's website in the coming weeks if you want more information on this specific project. And questions?
But I think that people might start typing in. So let's just, can you see the chat enough to read them and then answer them?
Yes. Yes, we can. All right. I don't think it tells you when people are typing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll see if I get a response. No, I've got an echo.
Oh, what kind of funding is available to start a program like Climb Wyoming?
Yes.
So I have to say, honestly, from our project, funding obviously, unsurprisingly, is the biggest issue and is the biggest limitation that people face when doing programs like Climb Wyoming, or doing any sort of, or providing supportive services in training programs. I think Climb Wyoming specifically gets a grant. I don't know who that's from, but they get a grant to do a lot of their programming. You know, if you're already doing job training, there's a lot of different funding streams that you can use. I don't know if you're WIOA eligible, but a lot of people we've seen use SNAP and TANF funds to help provide additional childcare funds. We have a whole recommendation section for what you could maybe do, and that's kind of what our promising practices report is trying to distill, what people are doing and how they can do it and maybe how to fund it. But funding is definitely the hardest suggestion that we have to meet. It's a tough one.
And I think one of our hopes is that this research will show funders, whether it's foundations or workforce development boards, that funding support services is very important for improving both participation and successful completion of training programs. So we're hoping that we can play a role in expanding the funding sources or the targeting of funding.
Denise asks, are there community colleges that give women enrolled in CTE programs priority in their child care centers? Very few. I personally only talked to one. I was helping my colleague, Julie Anderson, do the program scan. And that was actually one of the things we came across, is that the child care centers on community colleges, they're actually dwindling. A lot of places are shutting them down. There have been a couple of places that we found that what they'll do is they'll say there's reserved spots, and if you don't take them, then they open them up more generally. But there are a few that do that. The hard part is that we also talked to like the YWCA of Greater Cincinnati, and they also in their on-site child care center reserve spaces for participants. The hard part is that participants oftentimes don't have the money to make sure that they and their child can get to the job training center, so they'll want childcare closer to their home. I mean, there's various reasons why, you know, they won't necessarily choose the on-site childcare center. So there are some places that do it with varying degrees of success. Let's see. What challenges might there be to starting this is Sabia. What challenges might there be to starting a program like Climb Wyoming in an urban area? Was there ability to have success with that program in any way tied to the rural population or landscapes of Wyoming? So Climb Wyoming actually has 5 different sites, some in more rural areas than other, but one of them in, I'm forgetting, one of them in their bigger cities. And so they've actually been pretty successful in a variety of settings, I'd have to say. So I'm not sure if there are more challenges to a program like Climb Wyoming in an urban versus rural setting. I know that the different settings have their own challenges, such as transportation needs are different, cars versus public transportation, and things like that. But I would say funding is going to be more of your problem rather than the setting.
And it's also, if you look at other women-oriented programs on non-traditional careers, there are a number of pre-apprenticeship programs that prepare women to work in construction, and they are in Portland, in New York, in Biloxi, so really broad range of urban environments. I think the model is more to have the resources to support women and to bring them, you know, to create a level playing field in terms of the skills that maybe men are more likely to bring just, you know, through socialization on technical issues.
And we have 2 more questions from Lisa. In my discussion with women about jobs in computer support and construction, they are shying away because the hours are not conducive for childcare options. And then the second question from her is, do you have any suggestions for getting funding available for childcare after completing a program and getting started in career? These are 2 very good questions. The hours for childcare, that's a very difficult thing, and we're seeing that a lot in the research that we're doing with women in construction work. And I don't know if Ariane, if you want to.
I do think it's an issue, it's a problem, and my sense is, I mean, part of what we're hoping to do, not just with the programs here, is we think there needs to be more of a discussion of these caring issues, because, you know, the problem is in construction, women are 3% of the workforce. And so the women who are there are very keen and competent and able to organize their work. But there's very little discussion on the way work is organized. It's kind of almost saying, well, you know, of course I can do it. I'm a competent woman. But then on top of it, to have the strength of saying, well, do we really need to start all jobs at 6 in the morning? You know, isn't there some slightly different way, or are there some jobs that can be done differently on computing? You know, do we really need these work models where you have to work 24/7, you know, and never off it? So I think that it's a push-pull issue. And, you know, unless we can push more, can raise the voices of people in the industry, which is men and women, who have family responsibilities or for other reasons can't work the hours that are being worked at the moment, we are probably not going to make huge progress on getting more women in there. But on the other hand, other occupations and industries have changed. And so, you know, I think it's, as I say, it's push-pull and to raise the issues. On funding, I don't know.
Yeah, funding, again, that's the biggest challenge. hopefully by discussing these issues more and raising that this is a real challenge for women, that we can get funders on board to say, oh, hey, we need to talk about funding issues. We can get, maybe policymakers and legislators on board to say, maybe we need to discuss, how do we fund these programs? How do we make sure that they're funded? Other than that, I don't really have a concrete answer to that right now.
I would just, to add to that, I mean, I do think this is a general infrastructure problem in the United States. We're just doing a project in Germany, which is specifically on workplace childcare. And there you can see in the last 6, 7, 8 years, because the pressure on employers from just not having enough workers or skilled workers because women stayed at home with their kids or didn't have kids in the first place, have led to a big policy change. So now there really is more investment. You have a right to a place when your child is 3 and some kind of pre-K, and you have some rights to some childcare when a child is 1 year and older. It's very recent development, and it is because of skill shortages and demographic change. So, I think those are, to some extent, you need general investment in those type of services beyond training, and trainers and employers can't do it on their own. It needs to be a shift in what we provide as a society.
Can you see the one question that says, what tools are there for women to learn what their skill sets are? Could you answer that? And that'll be our last question and answer.
So I know that there are some tools. So I probably we can come back to that. I mean, our website doesn't have those tools, but I know that there are some aptitude tests people can take, that some colleges are encouraging people to take those, but it's not, I must admit, it's not one of our areas of expertise, but it may well be that somebody who is listening may provide as the answer to that question that's more competent than ours.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask you to turn your mic off, and I will end this webinar. Just to remind you that NAEP has professional development, research and evaluation services, technical assistance, and public policy and advocacy. These are some of the resources. Just remember, we can do customized webinars, customized training. We have a national summit that is in Alexandria. No, let's see. We're in a different place this year. We're at the Hilton, Crystal City, Arlington, Virginia, April the 24th through the 27th. We encourage everyone to attend. We have toolkits, graphic art, and consulting services. We can do things in person, we can do things in hand, and we can also do things online. So please look at the NAEP website. Here is a list of our toolkits, and we have some new ones coming out this spring. We'll do a webinar on one of the newest ones that is about project-based learning for STEM. We have a virtual learning community at naepequity.org. Please check it out. And I just want to thank our presenters and the webinar team and our sponsors. This was a very informative presentation, lots to digest. It was a really good update, especially for me to know more about occupational segregation, about middle skills jobs, and just really the similarities of the skills that people need and the kinds of training that that programs can do to just increase women's, I would say, salary in their occupations. So I thank you very much. I thank everyone who participated. We had a good turnout. I still see that we have a lot of people online. I appreciate you staying overtime. And I'm going to turn this over to Greg so that you can complete the survey and get a certificate if you'd like to have one.
Okay, I'm just moving to our closing layout right now. So you'll see there's a key links pod on the left. And what I'm going to do is click on this webinar evaluation survey. And this should automatically open the survey in another tab in your browser right now. If you have time, we'd like you to fill that out right now. If not, I will also be emailing this survey to an email to everyone who registered. Or you can just click on where it says webinar evaluation survey right there and open it yourself, or I am also going to post it into the chat room if you want to use that link. And as we mentioned before, that this webinar has been recorded and it will be available in the next day or two on the napeequity.org website. So thank you everyone for coming, and this is the end of the webinar.